Welcome back to Drawn to Darkness, a bi-weekly podcast where we discuss our favorite horror and true crime. If you already know from years of listening to true crime podcasts like My Favorite Murder to Call Your Dad if you're in a cult, we're here for you. My name is Annie, and I'll be introducing Caroline to my favorite horror movies, podcasts, TV shows, and books.
And my name is Caroline, and I'll be doing the same from the true crime side of things.
I want to start by asking you, what sort of cult would you be vulnerable to?
Okay, cats. One that has cats.
Okay, a cult based around cats.
Yeah, and actually there is another series maybe we'll get to at some point about a cult that was based around cats.
Really?
Yeah. You know, I think it's a really hard question for me because I so enjoy being by myself. So much of the day I need to be alone. If there were a cult where everyone was introverted and wanted to watch movies, that would probably get me as well. I think I'm going to have a hard time finding these cults.
So you would not want a checkmate, like a buddy watching your every move?
My God. Accountability buddy.
Oh, God.
I've hated that term since I heard about it from exercising. Another thing I hate that people do, they have an accountability buddy or whatever. I think also in substance use disorders. But anyway, no, that sounds like a nightmare.
I would be vulnerable to a cult based around watching TV by myself as well. That sounds great. But on a more serious note, I think I'm vulnerable to food purity messaging. As somebody who's, had an eating disorder in high school, and at times as an adult, I've fallen into like no sugar, whole foods, keto. I can see myself falling into something that controls your diet. I'm vulnerable to that, I think. I'm nowhere near joining a cult for that reason, but I could see that kind of cult drawing me in. Or prepper cult, like a Sarah Connor preparing for the robot takeover, just like doing chin-ups and, accumulating supplies in a bunker. Because there's definitely a part of me that thinks the people in the middle of nowhere with the bunkers and 20-year supply of canned food are the ones that have the right idea. So I could see falling for that sort of cult.
I think you mentioned a word that is probably the number one reason why I wouldn't join a cult is control. There is no way I would be comfortable with relinquishing anything close to this level of control. And I also am the child of an Iron Curtain refugee. And so I think I have been very programmed to be independent and skeptical of kind of everything.
I am very skeptical as well. So that would probably, and I'm just too busy. I don't have time to get stuck in, to go to UFO meetings. I mean, there's no way. Or, you know what else would make me join a cult? An insomnia cure, like a cult that had some promise of a deep and dreamless sleep. I could see that drawing me in because I'm not a good sleeper.
And I think that maybe is where we should be really positioning this question is less about the message, which I think they make a good point of this here, is that the moment you are at in your life and what you're seeking is really the thing that when you stumble upon someone with the right message and the right answer, that's when it happens. And it can happen, right, to anyone.
It's about being vulnerable. Now, today, we're going to talk about Heaven's Gate, the cult of cults, a cult I would not in any way in hell be vulnerable to. First of all, they ask if you procrastinate. That's a no-go for them, and that's something I would not be cut out for. Heaven's Gate is a cult that's based around Star Trek and the Von Trapp family singers. Trigger warning, there is discussion of mass suicide in this, and we will be spoiling this documentary as well. So go off and watch it, and then come back.
All right, so Heaven's Gate is a docuseries about the infamous Heaven's Gate cult started by Bonnie Lou Nettles and Marshall Applewhite, otherwise known as Herf. They are both formerly known by many names. The most formidable, I guess, would be T and Do. Starting in 1975 with the disappearance of New Age hippies on the West Coast, their story ends with the largest mass suicide event on U.S. soil.
So, what adjective would you use to describe this?
I was trying to think about this question earlier, and I just kept having Stefon in my head being like, this cult has everything.
I love that. He's perfect for that.
Yeah, so not an adjective, but like a full description. Like this cult truly has pretty much everything I can think of. I think except for the controlling the food isn't really much of a thing in
No,
this
it
one.
is. They massively control food. They don't talk about it much in the documentary, but they do.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because they didn't really talk about it in the documentary. Do they control food like what foods are being eaten or from a weight perspective?
From a removing the pleasure of eating to transcend to the higher level. So I listened to 6 hours of Last Podcast on the Left to supplement this, and they talk more about the food aspect. So the documentary really doesn't mention it at all, but there's a lot more to it. I'm going to quote Bluey and say wackadoo. Is that insensitive to call them a funny word for crazy? But I mean, I don't want to sound too judgmental, and I know there are like complex reasons for people who aren't mentally ill to fall into this sort of trap. It's about vulnerability, but they believed in some pretty bonkers stuff.
Yes, bonkers did come to my mind as well, by the way.
Well, my journey with this, I am surprised that I didn't know much about this. You know, given that I was a teenager in 1997, I feel like it should have been on my radar. I don't even remember the Hale Bopp comet coming.
Oh, really?
No, not really. I must have been way too into my teenage social life to be paying attention to the stars. But I mean, and it's weird that I don't know about this because I know so much about Waco and David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. I was heavily into that several years earlier when I was far too young to be. So yeah, I really didn't know much about this. I associated Heaven's Gate with doomsday, mass suicide, but that's really all I knew. You know, as I've said before, I am into a lot of kind of paranormal, weird, out there ideas. Like I've mentioned that I am into possession and ghosts and poltergeists and even Bigfoot. Disclaimer, I'm not into like the shape-shifting alien interdimensional Bigfoot that some people believe in, but I'm open to the idea of a reclusive, intelligent, undiscovered primate that is responsible for missing hikers and hunters. But I'm not into aliens, and I'm not super into cults as a true crime topic. And this is both. So I guess it's just not something I've ever been drawn to. And you know, having said that, I'm super into human psychology and what makes people behave the way they do. So I found this very interesting. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I have watched this before. I just want to shout out to True Crime Obsessed. They covered this docuseries on their Patreon. So it's not on the main feed. You would have to become a patron. But I've listened to that multiple times. And yeah, I do love cult stuff, I have to say. I'm not normally interested in aliens in space. I believe there are aliens, but I don't know how much they care about us more than we care about that. You know, like I don't think it's Independence Day. But yeah, I really love this story too because there's so many twists and turns that are so extreme. Like the whole plot line of the two sociologists who go undercover and try to join, and they're like, go to this post office and look in the 100th page of the phone book. And then that'll be an address. And then it's like, it's not an address, it's a location. And they're just like on this mountain. And then like people in a car appear like Men in Black, you know, like it's so insane.
I loved that.
Yes.
Like they really were able to develop an air of mystery, which I think would draw people in, right? Like that's exciting.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And like the haircuts are kind of bizarre. Everything is just quite bizarre. Each thing by its own. And then there's just so many of them back to back.
Yeah. Do you believe in aliens?
I mean, I don't think we're the only sentient beings in the galaxy. I don't know that there are any close enough that there's ever going to be an interaction. Right. Maybe.
Yeah, I think I'm like you. I don't believe that they are tea and dough, and I don't believe that they're wearing us like vehicles in some kind of Men in Black sort of way and infiltrating our society and choosing people to take to heaven. But yeah, I definitely believe in the likelihood of other life forms out in this massive, massive universe. What were some of the things it reminded you of?
Mostly other cult stories, but also it kind of reminded me of like I've been watching Righteous Gemstones, not to go too heavy on religion, but there's a lot of interesting religious ceremonies with weird outfits and everything that they have going on there. So I guess it reminded me of other religions and religions I'm not that familiar with that have kind of extreme wardrobes and regular things. It also reminded me about Parks and Rec, I guess.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of like town meeting atmospheres.
Hail Zorb.
Yeah. You're right. I totally forgot about those people. Yes, it did remind me of when we all thought we were going to die in 2012 because of the Mayan calendar.
And Y2K, 2000.
Right. That was more like the computers are going to go haywire.
But I think people were worried about apocalypse in general at the end of the millennium, right? Like, this is a turning point. It reminded me of, well, last week's episode, because a lot of their scripture that they were basing some of their beliefs on is, from the Bible. I've also started Carrie, and Book of Revelations comes up in Carrie as well. So that's 3 episodes in a row where this one biblical text that I know from people quoting it, I know from hearing about it, but I've never read it. So I started reading it, and I got to say, I got to give these scripture quoters credit where credit is due, because I couldn't read 1 minute of that before I got really bored. And so I ended up starting, I haven't finished it yet, a Last Podcast on the Left episode about it instead, because I was like, I'd rather just hear them talk about it than read it. But yeah, I was like, this is truly bonkers stuff. So I'm considering actually trying to read it so I know what I'm talking about. You mentioned the boring town hall meeting where T and Do are talking, or their apostles are recruiting people. That gave up major What We Do in the Shadows vibes for me as well.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, by the way, you said I'd rather listen to them talk about it than read it. And I just want to say for listeners here, that's generally my vibe, which is why you're going to get less books from me and more books from Anne.
You choose the best medium for whatever true crime we want to talk about, whether that's a book, a podcast, a documentary.
Yeah, for how you engage.
I have almost the same shoes as Marshall Applewhite. Like, I have black Nikes with the white swoosh. They're my running shoes. And
you do?
I do, yeah. Very cheap at the Nike outlet. I looked at their shoes and I was like, those are my shoes. I know they're not the exact model, but yeah, I have the same shoes.
Because that's one of the things that stuck out to me the most that I knew about this cult before ever watching this series, was that they all were wearing the same outfits and the same shoes, and the shoes were sticking out from under the blankets, because so many people reference that as being burned into their mind because they saw it on the news and it was so wild.
Well, now I'm going to think about that every time I go running. Thanks, Obama.
Thanks, Herf.
Thanks, Herf.
Thanks, Obama.
Before we get too deeply into this, I think we should point out that they didn't actually really call themselves Heaven's Gate from the beginning. That was what they called their website. They were often referred to as the UFO cult, and they tended to call themselves the Class.
Well, why didn't they call themselves the Odies?
What did Odie mean again?
It was their last name.
Yeah, but like, where did it come from? I remember hearing about this, and I can't remember. And it was like Ode meant something, and OD was like, make it cute. Like, I'm feeling cute. Odie.
Yeah, like, hey, Telodi and Shmamodi. And
what would your...
I was going to ask you, this is a question I wrote down. Annie, what is your name? And I actually, by the way, went to Reddit and tried to find other websites to answer this question, because I was super stressed out, because it's supposed to be 3 consonants and then ODY. But your name doesn't have 3 consonants. So I was like, what are you supposed to do with that? But I found out there were some people that did use vowels, so you could be an Odie.
There was definitely an Odie whose name started with I. I can't remember who it was, but...
Yeah, but they were saying it that way, but it had no... So I would be Krelody.
Yeah, that's what I would call you, Krelody.
But it would be spelled Crlody.
Yes.
Even though it's like Krelody.
I could do like my first name, middle initial, like Arzodi. What about Azodi? Because that's similar to my surname.
No, wouldn't it be Nazodi?
Where's the M coming from?
No, N.
Oh, nah. Oh.
So you'd be NNZ.
Nazodi.
NNZ.
Okay. All right. I'll take it.
Nazodi.
All right.
That's cool.
It's Nazodi. I love it. You can call me that from now on.
I love it too.
All right. Karodi. Names were a very big part of this.
I just don't think corrody sounds very good.
Well, it sounds like corroding, deteriorating.
Yes.
Well, I mean, aren't we all?
Okay. Yeah, true. Okay. Anyway, continue, Nazodi.
So the names thing, I guess this was part of the
Yeah.
leaving behind of your identity, which is a cult tactic. We've discussed in the past that I'm pretty good with names, right? Because I teach and I have new classes all the time with new groups of students and I have to remember them. I was really struggling. It's like T, Doe, Bonnie, Herf, Nettles, Applewhite, Pig, Guinea, the two, and then all the Odie names. And T and Doe.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty cute where it came from.
Look, I'm just going to call out the elephant in the room, which is that all of this happened because he was ashamed to be gay and he had a reverend dad, right?
Yeah.
Like, you could have stopped Thanos' moment. Just go to therapy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Although I guess he did go to therapy and that's where he met T.
Shame is a very powerful psychological force. And he would have grown up feeling pretty ashamed of himself. And he shouldn't have.
Right.
So basically, they believed that Ti and Do, named after the Do Re Mi song from The Sound of Music, yes, that's where they got their names, were the witnesses of the Book of Revelations, and that our bodies were temporary vehicles that could be shed if we could successfully shed our attachments, our addictions, our humanness, and you could graduate to a next level body. You had to overcome your impulses like a caterpillar, and then you would ultimately be picked up by a UFO and brought to heaven, which was a real place in space. Now, their beliefs evolved a lot throughout time. I think originally they were like, your physical body will actually be picked up and transformed into this alien-like thing. But, certain things interfere with that belief, and they evolved, and Do comes to believe that he is another iteration of Jesus Christ, but that Jesus was an alien, and that ultimately they had to dispose of their human bodies or vehicles, which resulted in this horrific mass suicide. So this was like this fusion of sci-fi and religion. Like they had Buddhist ideas and New Age stuff and spiritualism and Christianity, but also like all this kind of sci-fi UFO Star Trek-y stuff. And the horrible impact of all this is it resulted in people leaving behind their families, abandoning children, abandoning spouses, which was kind of the opposite of a lot of cults, which wanted you to kind of bring your children in. So I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of outside the normal cult playbook.
Yeah, and you shed light on one misconception I had earlier. So I want to just say a few other ways that I thought this cult was different. Until T dies, there is not a singular leader, right? Which is also unique. There's not usually more than one kind of head that are on somewhat equal footing, even though she was the elder, as he said. Another one is like forced labor. It seems like there wasn't really much of that going on. They did do work that they were paid for and that the community did utilize those funds, but there's no MLM element. There's no, you have to do all this stuff for free just for the master. It was much more communal. Also, like you mentioned, the melding of different ideas was really more in place when T was still alive. But once she dies, it definitely like rears towards the Christian conservative side of things, thanks to Do and the fact that he didn't just go to therapy.
Well, yeah, T dying should have been the, could this all be bullshit moment? Right? Because if she was actually an alien from outer space who was the witness to revelations, just dying of a human weakness shouldn't have happened. That was the opportunity to be like, maybe we should rethink things. But instead, he doubles down in the most dangerous way.
For sure.
I mean, a lot of what they were doing, again, when you compare to other cults, was pretty benign. As far as I know, there was no sexual abuse of children. I mean, often, the cult playbook is, well, we have all these rules for the members, but the cult leaders and the cult, the people high up in the hierarchy are abusing people. And I don't think that was happening. If it was, it hasn't really been spoken of.
Oh, one moment that you could kind of consider abuse, castration.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying there wasn't bad stuff. I'm talking early days.
Yeah.
It's they were consenting adults. It's a choice. And they weren't abusing anybody.
Right.
Now, they were harming people. They were abandoning their children like that Molly Ringwald lady. She did look like Molly Ringwald, right? That's not just me.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Especially when you look at the old pictures of her from like the 80s. Her parents left her when she was 10 years old and she's having to be the adult in the room and being like, this is crazy. Why would you leave me for this crazy UFO message? There's genuine harm and loss and sadness that this cult caused. But compared to the worst of the worst, most of it was pretty benign, at least at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, the ones that there are docuseries about, I agree. Pretty benign.
I can't remember if I brought this up yet, but The Family in Australia. Have you heard of that one?
No.
So she basically like collected children. She was the opposite. Instead of convincing people to abandon their children and come to the cult, she was convincing people to hand over their children to her. And she was starving them and abusing them. You might have seen pictures where like there's a bunch of little blonde children with short haircuts. Like she's dyeing their hair blonde so they all look alike. So they all look like her children. Compared to that, and it's like, well, that's so much worse.
Yeah. Or like The Vow, Nexium. There's no like branding happening.
No. I mean, there's so many worse things out there.
Yeah.
I thought the connection to Christianity was interesting. And it just got me thinking about the formation of religions and how what starts as a cult, right? Like I think all religions start as a cult and because it starts small, right? And when does it become a religion? Is it about numbers, power, how they've established things. And I think what all cults and religions probably do is latch onto an existing belief system. And they've latched on to Christianity. And Christianity does that, or did that. We have holidays based around equinoxes and solstices because the pagans were celebrating the change of seasons, like Easter. I did some research on Easter with my kids recently because they're like, why do we have eggs and bunnies when Jesus died on the cross? It makes zero sense, right? And it's because it was a pagan festival.
Correct.
Celebrating, symbols of fertility and new life at spring, right? So you can see the connection of how Christianity, starting as a cult, followed by a few, latched onto an existing belief system and then gained power and followers and ultimately became, the religion we know today. So Heaven's Gate is only a cult because it only had 39 people who believed in it and not millions over the course of time.
Totally.
So how do you think people get sucked into this?
That's a thing I think this docuseries handles very well. I have to compliment it because they make a whole point of showing a clip in the wake of the mass suicide of a person saying, I wish people would talk more about what led up to this than the end of this. And I think there are a lot of people that are in circumstances where they're searching for something. Like Sawyer, who was a very interesting person to be following throughout this whole thing. Or they're on acid, like that other lady mentions.
Well, yeah, I guess these people are left over from the 1960s counterculture and hippies and everything, and they're still looking for something in some cases. Yeah, I know we're saying things like crazy and bonkers and wackadoo, but it's probably not the right language. It's vulnerability. And that's how normal, smart, professional people who have something missing and happen to come across this at the right time when they're ripe for the picking. I was speaking to a friend who has a connection to someone who spent decades in a cult in Australia. And this person joined when she was 18 and homeless, right? So if she had had a safety net, there's no way she would have ended up in this cult.
Yeah, I think there's trafficking involved in some cult circumstances, and this one isn't that. I mean, this one really is those Parks and Rec meetings. I just can't even imagine attending those. And what spaces are those spaces? Are they just like renting town halls?
That would be my assumption.
Do you think? Because I don't think we have a space like that. Like, I don't know where they would do in the town I live in. Because we usually have our town halls like in the school building.
Yeah, like a school gym or something.
But the school gym is not about to be like, come on, alien cult, have your meeting here.
Yeah, the school might want to maintain some separation of state and cult, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I did have that as a note to ask you, where do you think rooms they're renting are?
I mean, there's just rec centers and halls and stuff. I don't know. It was the 70s. Maybe the rules were different. There's also, perhaps in some cases, a desire to hand off responsibility. Perhaps you're a person who's not happy in your shitty job, or you're not enjoying parenthood, and this is the excuse to escape from the reality of all the responsibilities that we have in what we consider normal life.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that because I literally today had this conversation with a friend. We've both lost parents, and we were talking about, this is the only time that we were like, I wish I was Catholic because then it would just be like, they would just tell me everything I'm supposed to do. I don't have to come up with anything. I don't have to say anything that isn't just scripture. If someone could just come to me with a menu and have this be done, that would be great. So maybe that's the cult I would join. Someone who would do the things I don't want to decide.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of it. Surrendering to a higher power, whether that's a spiritual God or an actual person. Responsibility is tough. Making decisions is tough. Showing up every day as a parent or to work is difficult. And if you join a cult like this, you don't have to do that.
So true.
Let's talk about the tactics they used. I mentioned earlier, and again, this wasn't in the documentary, but according to the last podcast on the left deep dive, they did control food. We've talked about the disassociation from their identities by changing their names. We've talked about the haircuts that they all had to conform to. Then some things that we haven't discussed too much was the no privacy, that they had these checkmates to watch them, which would not work for you.
Right. And the checkmate was the person that you would least want to be friends with.
Right.
So it's like you're also forced not just to be with a person, but a person you can't stand.
What a nightmare. There's a lot of people I can't stand, and I don't want to spend time with any of them.
I'm just trying to imagine, like, if I'm trying to think of a workplace, right? Because that's the only environment where you're forced to be around people, like, maybe you don't get along with. And if I had to sit next to the person that I can stand the least, I think I would, yeah, I would quit. There's no way I would stay
Well,
around.
you sound like Leslie, the really pretty old lady. Do you remember her? She's only in the beginning.
Oh, yeah. She was a
Yeah.
model.
She was so pretty when they
Yes.
showed the old picture.
She was gorgeous.
She's gorgeous now, but she talked about being like a hippie and wanting freedom. And the second they were like matched her up with a checkmate that she hated, she was like, I am out. And then we never hear from her again in the documentary.
Yeah. Also, no sex.
Yeah. Well, that had a lot to do with it for her. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. She was like, no way. I mean, like I was a hippie,
Yeah.
so I could do a lot
This
of
is the
that.
opposite of what I wanted. I really liked that. I think it's Steve Hassan, the cult expert with the really like gentle face. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Was he the one with the bow tie?
Maybe. I think so. And he's the one who's counseling
Yeah.
Dick Joslin later.
Their guy. Yes. Yes. I like both of them.
Okay, I might be getting my guys mixed up, but they talked about these dehumanizing techniques and what it means to be brainwashed, and it's all about that loss of autonomy. So we've got no privacy, new names, dressing the same. But the other thing we haven't talked about is the new terminology.
Right.
You were talking about last week with Midnight Mass that there's all this terminology in Catholicism that you were like, what? How do I not even know this? And so I think knowing the words is a massive part of being part of the culture.
Yeah. I'm sure we're going to reference this podcast at the end, but there's a great podcast, Sounds Like a Cult. I listened to an episode about working at a nonprofit because I worked at a nonprofit. And the thing that made me go, oh my God, maybe it is a cult was this aspect, this special terminology, because it's something when a new employee joins, we're like, blah, 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 and they don't understand anything. And you're like, you'll get it. We're in. You could be in soon too. If you try, stick around.
And are you love bombing them? Like making them feel super welcome? Because that's another cult tactic is the initial love bomb. Yeah, I was looking through Sounds Like a Cult episodes. I've listened to the PTA Moms one, but I kind of want to listen to, there's a podcasting one. There's a Horse Girls episode.
Yeah.
I was a horse girl.
There's one on the health stuff. Like if you think that might be the cult, you join.
I am much more healthy now emotionally about that sort of stuff than I used to be. But I do recognize that I have that flaw in me. Yeah, that's a great podcast. My brother-in-law is a Disney adult and he's slowly turning my sister into one. So I think I might recommend that one to them. So yeah, even though this particular cult didn't actually make it physically hard to leave, as some cults do, by creating this highly controlled, lack of autonomy, self-sealing system, they made it really psychologically hard to leave once you've become indoctrinated.
Mm-hmm. As evidenced by some of the people that we meet, Sawyer and the other guy, Frank was his name, the other guy?
Frank.
And then obviously the daughter, Molly Ringwald. What you just mentioned, actually, I can't believe I forgot to say this other aspect that's so different. He sent them all home and they were able to just go home and only like one person didn't come back.
Was that a test of loyalty?
Right.
Apparently, and again, not talked about in the documentary, he ghosted people who weren't fully committed. Like, how you talked about that meet here, check this PO box thing. Apparently there were certain people that were kind of talking back a bit and he said, okay, well, you guys go get jobs for a little bit and then come back. We'll meet you here. And then just like never turned up, which was a gift in the end, probably for those people.
For sure.
Now, we haven't talked much about the shaming of sex in terms of shedding your human impulses to reach a higher level. You have talked about how perhaps a lot of this is based around the fact that Applewhite grew up gay in a time where it wasn't acceptable to be that way. So he really wanted to shed all sexuality and gender. I thought it was interesting that they used Boy George to justify no sex.
I also thought it was crazy that here is a gender fluid person on TV, but because it's effeminate, it's sloppy and offensive. And instead of all of them conforming to the male, they could have all conformed to the quote unquote female or feminine side of people.
So they were falling into heteronormative traps anyway, right? Even though they were saying they were genderless.
And the patriarchy.
Yes. Damn the patriarchy. I thought Sawyer talking about his guilt and shame over his nocturnal emissions was so sad and so mean, like the way they had a towel system. Is this something I learned from the podcast or the documentary? I can't remember, but like a towel system that you...
It's from the podcast. I only know it because of listening to the True Crime Obsessed episodes, they mention that at first they had sheets that you could just change, and it was sort of a no questions asked situation. But then they had a sign your name out towel system after that.
That is cruel.
Yeah.
I felt really bad for poor Sawyer, who probably had very normal human impulses and was forced to feel ashamed and like he failed.
Yeah, and MTV saved his life.
Yeah, I know. I love that. That's great. But, I mean, is he saved? Like, Sawyer is still a true believer. And it's been like decades.
Not only that, but I can't believe he wasn't turned by the thing that seems to have turned almost everyone else. The reveal of T's daughter gives when they're all together after the mass suicide. Terry is her name. There's all these letters from her mom saying, love mom, and also to conform and, really instructing her to do the opposite of everything that T was espousing in the cult environment.
You might disagree with me on this, but in some ways for me, T is the biggest villain here. I know it wasn't under her that the mass suicide occurred, but that is so hypocritical to me. I mean, to everybody, it's not just to me. Like, she writes her daughter and she doesn't bring her daughter. So she's telling everybody they need to cut off their human relationships, abandon their children, while she didn't fully do it, which proves she knew it was fake. Because if you actually believed you were an alien and you were going to go up to heaven in a UFO, you'd want to bring your kid with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least in the starting of the cult, she's the biggest villain here. And, maybe she's the one that gave Doe all these crazy ideas. They meet like George McFly and Lorraine in a nursing situation when he's vulnerable.
Right.
And she starts, I think, filling his head with crazy ideas. And he took it too far. But I think it starts with her.
I agree. Actually, my biggest star is around who do you think was in charge here, really? Because I was very clearly like, T is to blame for all of this. But the more times that I've listened to this and the more times I've watched it, I've really been confused because you would think, just as you said, he meets her when he's had a nervous breakdown and she's a doctor at this mental hospital that he's at. And so you would immediately think, okay, she took advantage of a vulnerable person and she abandons her life, etc. And then there's also the aspect that like she's T and he's Doe, so she comes before him and she's his elder or whatever. But all these other aspects don't totally mesh that way with me, like her relationship with Terry and her interest in protecting her. You feel like if she loves her daughter that much, what's keeping her from getting back to her? There must be some attachment there, and why can't she? And also the daughter mentioned Herf was always listening when they were on the phone, which is a total abusive behavior for a partner. And then the other aspect is really the direction it pivoted to, because while she's still alive, none of this suicide talk is around, and much more of it is egalitarian, communal, a real matriarchal society, etc. And then he takes over, and I wonder, was she being held back by him at all? I don't know.
One thing I want to point out as we talk about T is they keep talking about how charismatic these people are, that 20 people drop their lives, but T just sits there in these town hall meetings looking like the most boring high school librarian you've ever encountered. But she didn't seem to sit there looking like she was about to fall asleep in those meetings. And, she's just this witchy, hippie crystal lady that for some reason people paid attention to. And she's a hypocrite. So I'm pretty mad at T.
And she's calling Boy George sloppy? I mean, hello.
Come on. Boy George looked great. But, having said that, nobody was getting castrated under T's watch. So that was pretty crazy. I mean, I do wonder if T was kind of controlling Doe and then T dies. Sawyer does talk about how there were some really more zealous members and that perhaps some of the most extreme ideas were being fed to Doe through them. Who's going to put their hand up for castration first? That to me just seems pretty crazy, but it just made me wonder how in charge is Doe, even when he is their leader.
It's a good question.
I felt really bad for Dick Joslin, who was also gay and probably made to feel ashamed, for his kind of sexy 70s Ken doll look when Doe says that his vehicle was attracted to Dick Joslin's vehicle. Mm-hmm. I wonder how much that had to do with his ultimate escape, because Dick Joslin survives. At least he survives the cult.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, his vehicle was just too hot and it saved his life.
So it seems like sexy people got out of this cult because Leslie got out too.
Yeah.
This was another moment that was justified by scripture. If your eye offend you, pluck it out.
Mm-hmm.
And they were applying that to their testicles, which is pretty awful. And I guess that leads us to the biggest problem, which is the mass suicide. So it was Bonnie Nettles dying of cancer in 1985 that could have been the this isn't real moment, but instead they used her death to justify communication with her at a higher level, because if it comes from that elder member, I think they called it, it must be believed. So should we talk about how the setting of this time kind of contributed to this becoming a thing, or?
It's quite interesting and notable what early adopters they were, creating their website, which is still live and active today. I think Sawyer is the one maintaining it. But also that aspect made them have a close connection to conspiracy theory. And this is back when conspiracy theories were like fun stuff, like, oh, hey, there might be something else behind the Hale-Bopp comet and not Sandy Hook is a hoax, etc. There was no Alex Jones level stuff. It was like who shot JFK in the early days of the online. But I do think that definitely played a role in certainly the timing. The thought that the second thing was there that they didn't see when they bought that telescope. I felt so bad for that store guy.
I know. They returned the telescope. How dare you? I mean, I think the two societal trends that are important are the UFO and space mania that started when the first so-called alien abductions, entertainment that was growing in popularity with Star Trek. You know, they got a lot of their ideas from Star Trek, which is crazy. We've got X-Files, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Wars. In 1968, there was a book that, I don't know if they mentioned the documentary or the podcast I listened to, Chariot of the Gods, which was putting forth the idea that aliens are the ones who gave us the pyramids and Stonehenge, something some people still believe. And then you get Hale-Bopp comet, and it's just this sign. So I think if Hale-Bopp hadn't happened in that time period, maybe this final suicide wouldn't have happened. I also think, you know, the 70s is so, I guess, not the disco aspect of it, but like outside of disco, it's so drab.
Everything's brown.
They've got those like shitty plastic chairs for their classes, and it's such a contrast between like their sci-fi delusions of grandeur, like Beam Me Up Scotty, with their crappy brown carpeting and plastic chairs that they're having classes on.
Yeah, although they did move on up. They got some nice upper middle class houses and everything in the later years.
And ultimately, they have a mansion. That was one of my outstanding questions. How did they afford that mansion?
I think through their contracts, they did like webpage building and stuff. And then there was also that connected guy. I think they used one or two trust funds. But then when that came out, they were earning their keep doing like web stuff.
Yeah, so then in the late 90s, we're getting a lot of apocalypse beliefs. Do you remember the prophecies of Nostradamus were like a big thing? I remember watching History Channel specials about Nostradamus. So there's this sense of urgency that the world is ending and this is your last chance to get out. I thought those exit interviews were haunting.
Yeah, it was like the creepiest talent show I've ever seen. That whole, you know, singing the song and everything like that. It just was so 39 to beam up.
And they're so happy. You know, they're smiling at the idea of leaving this world and going to heaven. And just the brainwashing seems so clear in those moments. They're beaming. No pun intended.
Yeah.
You know, I thought those exit interviews were a real manipulation technique. You know, when you are on a diet and you tell somebody about it, I feel like forcing them or, you know, asking them, maybe they weren't forced, to sit there and explain how happy you are to die is a way to ensure that you will do it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. They look hypnotized, etc. Episode 3 begins with a radio interview where they're like, "Do I look brainwashed?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, you do." You know, it's so true.
I almost find the eventual going along with this suicide less surprising, though, than joining the cult to begin with. You see these UFO posters and these supposedly charismatic people in this drab town hall, and you drop your life. Like, that shocks me. But then once you've been in this situation for decades, right? And you think about growing up in any culture, right? Most of the people we know that we grew up with went to college, got married, got a job, had kids, et cetera, et cetera. We almost all do what is normal in whatever our culture is. And their culture, although we see it as very abnormal, they were just doing what was normal. So to me, the going along with it is less shocking than the joining to begin with.
I absolutely agree. I think the docuseries mentions the Ash conformity study, which is certainly then illustrated by several of their actions, the castration being one, but obviously their eventual agreement to beam up together over a few days But yeah, I think when you have given up everything about your life, like where do you even go and how? Oh, I did actually look up when Sawyer leaves, he gives him $600, which today would be $1,371.90.
You could put down a down payment on an apartment, I guess. Get some groceries.
Yeah, you've first last,
Yeah.
on a rental.
Well, let's talk about Doe, Marshall Applewhite, just a little bit more. I mean, is he a villain? Is he a narcissist? Is he a sociopath?
Yes.
Is he just misguided, a damaged man who actually believes the nonsense he was spouting? What do you think?
Why not both?
Why not all?
Yeah. Yeah. I think he's all of the above.
Do you think he's charismatic?
I think to some types of people, he's charismatic. I think people that enjoy sermon, when he's talking to the camera, it's so interesting. I don't think I noticed the first time I watched it as much as this time how often he contradicts himself. And it's clearly the same recording. He's wearing the same outfit, it's with the same backing. But he contradicts himself sometimes almost immediately, one after the other. But you're not even really like processing what he's saying because you're just engaged with his eyes and his face and how engaged with you he is or appears to be.
Yeah, it's that idea of making you feel like you're the only one in the room
Mm-hmm.
with those crazy eyes. I mean, to me, I don't want to be looked at like that. Please avert your eyes. It's making me uncomfortable. But yeah, I guess some people, they want to be seen.
Yeah. Or at least find it distracting.
Yeah. Somebody talked about feeling the Holy Spirit or a sense of euphoria when they looked into Doe's eyes. Not me like that.
No. I think I only experienced that with Paul Walker.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. He can look at me. I thought one interesting thing was that he wasn't in the front row in the Christmas talent show. He sat amongst them in the back of the bus. He did seem like he was a man of the people, even though he was the leader. So I don't know. It's just something I thought was interesting.
It might be interesting to try to dissect the instances where he did that because at the same time, he's the only one in the master bedroom and he doesn't go last.
Right. He got somebody to do it for him. Which is, again, why I question how much control did he actually have? Were other people manipulating him? I guess nobody knows exactly what happened in those last 48 hours, but I have questions. I really liked Sawyer. I'm so glad he got out uncastrated, and I really hope that he can find meaning in life beyond the beliefs of this cult, because I feel so bad for him that he feels like he failed because he's still alive and still has, sexual desires. And I just hope he can find meaning in life.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really liked him. I really felt for him. And Frank, it's devastating to see the long-term effect.
That was one of my biggest Doe villain moments when Frank talks about feeling humiliated because Doe made a comment about how deep his voice was. And that now, decades later, I thought he had cancer. So I thought he recovered from throat cancer, and that was the cause of the way he spoke. But I feel like it's psychosomatic. Doe shamed him about having a masculine voice, and he tried to mask that, and he still can't speak. That I felt was so tragic.
Yeah, I totally agree. Although it seemed less pronounced in that news interview he was in younger, where he and Sawyer are the talking heads in a news interview. But, to your point, as a psychosomatic thing, maybe it's only gotten worse as he hasn't fully processed.
But it seems like he's really trying.
Yeah.
When he says he's going to drive around the country and he's going to learn to have fun, and he has this kind of fragile smile, again, I hope he finds happiness too, because he seems like a sweetheart. And it's just so sad. He loved that Erica, and he wanted to get out with her when they were given the opportunity to go home. He wanted to leave. He wanted to hug her, which is just so normal. And, I guess she was too far down that cult rabbit hole to do that. And so it reminded me a little bit of Midnight Mass, and I won't say exactly what, but the idea of religion interfering with the ability to have a normal human relationship.
It kind of reminded me of when Jim first kissed Pam, and she's like, I can't. And she kind of bails, but ultimately they were meant to be together. I mean, I do feel like that Frank and Erica, unfortunately, all lost their chance.
They don't get a Jim and Pam ending, do they?
No, it's because it wasn't scripted.
What do you think is the most disturbing aspect of all this?
T's hypocrisy is probably the most disturbing. Not that I think she knew what was going to eventually happen, but because it does eventually happen, it's really quite disturbing.
Yeah. Well, I think my moment is similar to that. It's a moment that would have been totally normal, maybe even kind of cute if it didn't lead up to the biggest mass suicide on American soil, the Christmas party. There's this Christmas decor, and they're baking and exchanging presents, and they're having this talent show. They're reading Jumanji. It's this weird mix of normalcy and insanity that has a really ominous feel because you know where it ends up.
I also think maybe a little less so now that I know that food control was a part of it. But I did write down the biggest evidence of brainwashing is 39 people having the same last meal, both food and drink.
Yeah. I'd be so pissed if it was my last meal and it was chosen for me.
I know. There's no way 39 people agreed on the last meal they want to have or the last drink. I mean, good on that server. I'm sure she had a great night because this would have been easy in comparison to another table of 39 people. But still, as long as there was one bill.
I don't know. I've worked in restaurants and 39 people want the same dessert. You're probably in trouble.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
You don't have that much in the freezer necessarily.
That's true. Wow.
I can imagine the chefs yelling at me for bringing that order back.
Oh, man. You're so right.
I also thought that stuff at the end was really at odds with their beliefs, was that you're shedding human desires and transcending. Like going to SeaWorld and gambling at Vegas. Or I don't know if they were actually gambling, but they went to Vegas. You know, like when they go out on their Heaven's Gate day of fun, like Janice and Joey's day of fun. That's such a contradiction because they're having all this fun going to SeaWorld and everything. And how does that line up with shedding their human impulses and becoming a higher being?
Absolutely. They won $20.
You know, that's human stuff, you know? And the other thing I thought was very upsetting that I didn't know until I think the end, probably episode 4, is that asphyxiation was involved. I assumed it was a drug overdose, which seems less viscerally horrifying to me than a plastic bag over your head. It just makes me wonder what those last 48 hours were like. Did people try to back out at the last minute, or did they all just succumb? You know, was there horror or was there just submission? I don't know.
I believe they said they all had benzos in their system as well. It doesn't say how much, but potentially they could have been asleep because, you know, that daughter, when her dad tried to do the same thing, like he reflexively takes the bag off, she said. Right.
Do you have any criticism of the documentary?
I didn't love the drawings.
Same.
The animation was a very weird choice and vibe. Especially, I noticed, actually, I wrote this down because, so when they're all marrying Herf, which we also didn't talk about, that is super creepy.
Weird.
When they're all getting married to Herf and they're showing the cartoon of two figures, but then when it switches over to the hand getting the ring on its finger, it's the right hand, not the left hand.
Okay.
And I noticed this because I did that at my wedding, and I put the ring on my husband's right hand instead of his left hand, and I'm still embarrassed about it. And then I went to a wedding like 2 weeks ago. My sister-in-law did the same thing, and she was horrified. I was like, "Don't worry, I did the same thing." So anyway.
So your sister-in-law is in good company with you and the members of the Heaven's Gate cult.
Only the cartoon.
Okay. Well, weird details that we haven't discussed. I totally agree about the artsy animations. I just was like, come on, I don't know. I'd rather hear more historians and specialists, psychologists talking about what makes these people tick than some animations. Mm-hmm. Weird details. The marriage, the $5.75 in cash in case they need bus fare. I mean, Star Trek. We haven't really talked about Star Trek, but
I looked up their whole list. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
Their whole list of approved things to watch. Okay. So approved TV series, 60 Minutes, Star Trek, both OG, TNG, DS9, and Voyager. I don't know. I've never watched Star Trek. Wheel of Fortune, Chicago Hope, Dark Skies, and Touched by an Angel. And then there was a forbidden list. They were forbidden to watch GoldenEye, The Island of Dr. Moreau, Multiplicity, and Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, yeah. Little House on the Prairie is too, like, family-oriented.
Yeah. I don't think the message of Star Trek was become a Borg, but I guess that's the message. Art is up for interpretation always, I guess.
I guess it was that hive mentality thing, collective consciousness. I mean, it's just silly to get your religion from Star Trek. I've watched some Star Trek, only the first season. I'm like Captain Kirk era because my mom and brother were into it. But yeah, I've never watched any of the other ones.
We should disclose that we're both like super Jedi people. We're very into Star Wars.
Yeah. We're Star Wars people, not Star Trek people. There is a difference. Do we have any unanswered questions? I feel like most of my unanswered questions have come up. The only one that we haven't discussed is, at the beginning, they talk about how cults arise in times of societal stress. This is a time of societal stress, and I wonder what cults are simmering under the surface now. Is there something similar happening? Or is everything so spread out because of the internet that the rising of a small little sliver of a cult like this couldn't happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think a major trend in cults, I think, has become the MLM aspect, because as life becomes less and less affordable, like that's that's a reason for high stress that's super exploitable.
That's a vulnerability.
Yeah.
What do you think is some of the extra horror beneath the surface? I mean, for me, it was the lost relationships, the families left behind, and the shaming of normal human sexuality.
Yeah, I agree. And I know we've used, as you said earlier, we've used a lot of terminology that is not maybe the most sympathetic. But I think we're using that, again, as you said, to talk about some of these details that are pretty out there. But the horror beneath the surface for me, I mean, I wrote these quotes down of people that become susceptible, situationally vulnerable, looking for a place to belong. Also, Sawyer said he was seeking something, and I wanted to have a specialness. Those are all things everyone experiences and feels, and that is what's horrifying.
Yeah, I think the idea that death is better than obscurity, too, right? Which links into what you've just said about wanting to feel special by dying. It would have just been some silly little byline that, got made fun of occasionally if they hadn't died. Death made them iconic.
Yeah, I think to add on to the things happening in the time period, like you mentioned before, they discuss Waco, maybe that Herf wanted to be seen like Koresh at that level.
Yeah, didn't they want the government to come kind of crashing down on them and do it for them?
Yeah.
They were too harmless until they killed themselves.
They closed the harvest too early, I guess.
I also think the sunk cost fallacy, and we talked about this in episode 2 on Sweet Bobby, that when you've put so much time into something, you feel like you can't get out. And I think these people who chose to follow Herf on this mass suicide probably just didn't know what else to do because they've been in this for so long. And how do you get out when you're so institutionalized? And, those people who did get out seem somewhat lost, right? Like Sawyer and Dick Joslin, who sadly died of AIDS shortly after this, and Frank. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What do we learn about survival other than don't join a cult? Stay away from anyone promising UFOs.
They say the first step is awareness, right? On modifying any behavior. So awareness of studies like the Ash conforming study, other things. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about the video where people get in the elevator, someone's facing backwards, everyone starts facing backward. Like being aware that is your natural tendency is the first way to avoid it.
I wonder if they should be adding psychological studies on conformity to high school classes that study media bias and fake news and stuff like that as part of a critical literacy.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's important to know about the Ash conformity study. And what is it the something prison experiment?
Stanford.
Stanford, yes. Not Stanford. Stanford prison experiment.
Stanford, yeah. Maybe when you're learning about Nazi Germany.
Yeah. All right. Do you have a palate cleanser?
My kids and I don't know if I've mentioned before that my kids and I watch TikTok at night, but Annie, how big of a deal is Ozyman over there? Ozyman Reviews.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Really?
But I'm not on TikTok, so.
No, I know, but he didn't start on TikTok. He's been a YouTube star or whatever. But anyway, there's a guy in Australia called Ozyman Reviews. His handles are Ozyman Reviews. We'll link it. And he basically takes interactions with animals that people send him, and he does voiceover for it. And I think his most famous one came out around Christmas time. It's of a guy at a power plant area trying to save a koala. And so he does the voice of the koala. Like there's a guy talking to an animal and he's the animal responding. And they're hilarious.
This sounds like my jam. I've got to look this guy up.
Yeah.
Animals, Australian accents, humor,
Because I tell you, I'm into so many things on TikTok. There's so many people I love. But every night, one of my children is just like, okay, can we get to Ozyman? It's all he wants to watch.
I will check it out. Okay. If you like this, Caroline already mentioned Sounds Like a Cult podcast. I was going to mention that as well. The movie, also a Mike Flanagan movie, Dr. Sleep. And this is about a very evil cult living a nomadic lifestyle, and they're driving around and camping, which just sort of reminded me of the beginning, at least, of Heaven's Gate. Spoiler warning for literally the most traumatizing child death I've ever witnessed on film. So skip that scene if that's a problem for you. It was a problem for me. Obviously, Star Trek and The Sound of Music, The X-Files, which came up last week because of Riley's poster in Midnight Mass. Under the Banner of Heaven, I may have mentioned before, is a true crime nonfiction and TV show meets religion. So that was really interesting. The Handmaid's Tale, the novel, is fantastic in addition to the TV show. Parable the Sower by Octavia Butler is about a dystopian apocalyptic situation, but also the formation of a new religion. The horror film Midsummer has a lot of parallels to this. The novel In the Clearing, which is a thriller, like a fictionalized version of the Australian cult The Family. There's also a TV show with Guy Pearce and Miranda Otto. Tower of Babylon by Ted Chiang, which is, I think, the third short story I've recommended by him. It's about a society that over the course of hundreds and hundreds of years attempts to build a tower to heaven, which they believe is a real place in the sky. And my last recommendation is a nonfiction psychology book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. I read this for a better understanding of the impact of childhood trauma. And the author is a psychologist who worked with kids from the Branch Davidian cult. And yeah, it just talks about psychology of trauma, and it's a really fascinating book. So those are my recommendations. Do you want to add anything?
Like you said, I mentioned a couple things as we were going on. Did you say Yellow Jackets?
No, I didn't, but let's add it. I love Yellow Jackets.
Yeah, there's a lot about groupthink because I was thinking of like Animal Farm, like classic books of conformity and groupthink
absolutely.
And the dangers of that. And Yellow Jackets also came to my mind.
1984.
Yeah, totally. If cults are your thing, there are so many that I want to recommend, but I want to say, we are definitely going to cover these at some point. But, highly recommend The Vow. Love Has Won. Actually, I would put Love Has Won in number one for other cults that have a lot going on, and The Way Down. But like I said, we are going to cover all of those at some point.
Great. Well, our next recommendation is Carrie by Stephen King. We've been talking about this for a few episodes now. So this was coming up regardless, but I think it really ties in well with the sexual shame that these cult members were made to feel.
Can't wait for that.
Thanks for listening. Please do all the things podcasters ask you to do, like and subscribe. Check us out on Instagram at Drawn to Darkness Pod. Tell a friend, write a review on iTunes, and if, like Shirley Jackson, you delight in what you fear, join us in 2 weeks here at Drawn to Darkness. Special thanks to Nancy Azzano for our cover art. You can find her on Facebook at Nancy Azzano Art. And Harry Kidd for our intro and outro music. You can find him on Spotify. Oh no.
Annie's being swallowed by her
pillow fort.
Her booth, in quotation, air quotes.
My pillow fort.
Oh my God. This is so